about that too. But I want to just start with China, because I think this is a topic that is on a lot of people's minds. It is always on a lot of people's minds, but certainly after the president just got back from a trip to China last week. I wanted to start with you, Secretary Blinken. You said you've done a lot of speeches. We looked at a lot of your speeches. You said if the United States is competing with China alone, we may well wind up on the losing side of the equation. Where do you think the relationship stands now? What is your assessment of that? And what is your prescription on where it really needs to go from here?
Well, thanks very much, Jen. It's great to be with everyone, be with my friends and colleagues as well. Look, I think we have a president who divides the world up into what he sees as spheres of influence. And the big countries get to do what they want in their part of the world, and the smaller countries have to suffer what they will. And that includes China. And so other than some trade issues that may affect us, his inclination is to give them free rein over their region and maybe even a little bit beyond. And I think we saw that play out. The challenge is what happens within one sphere of influence almost never stays there. And countries are always looking for more. And China is an example of that as well. This is the one country that has the capacity as well as the intent to reshape the international system in a way that advances its interests and values and probably undermines ours. I think, Jen, as we're looking at it, we have to resist trying to put it on a bumper sticker. There's no neat way of summing up what is probably the most complex and consequential relationship. We compete, for sure. We can test where we really disagree. And we have to find ways to cooperate on issues that really are in the interests of both of our peoples. But from that perspective, you've got to approach it from a position of strength. And that means making ourselves as strong as possible at home with the right investments. But it also means making ourselves as strong as possible around the world, aligning other countries, building convergence, because, to the point you made, if we're competing with China one-on-one, that's a game that we may lose. Their market's much bigger. Their manufacturing is 3 times our manufacturing. Purchasing power parity is greater than ours. More papers, more patents, a bigger navy. You can go down the list. But when we're aligned with Europe, with Japan, with Korea, with India, with Australia, with Canada, we go from about 25% of world GDP to 50 or 60%. A lot harder for China to ignore. Unfortunately, where we are now is, just as the president seems to be underwater on a lot of issues within the United States, we're underwater around the world. There was a poll out a couple of weeks ago, 130 countries. And what it found was that China was seen as a more credible actor than the United States. Germany, 70% of people in one poll saw the United States as an adversary. So this means that our ability to align, to build convergence in ways that can deal with the challenges that China poses has been vastly diminished. And that's a real challenge going forward.
That's sort of a perfect setup for you, Ambassador. I mean, everybody knows who the ambassador is, but she spent not just time living up in the apartment in New York, engaging with other UN ambassadors, but also decades serving around the world in the Foreign Service. And one of the things about these trips is these countries, to your point, countries around the world are evaluating not just the United States, but also the strength of the leader that you're meeting with. I wonder if you're thinking about how President Xi and other potential partners and some current allies that Tony referenced look at this trip. How do they look at this trip? And how do you kind of repair these relationships and try to rebuild that type of coalition that he was referencing? Secretary Blinken, I'm sorry, I worked with him before. I'll keep calling him the secretary. Go ahead.
I think, am I on? I think the entire world was watching Trump's trip to China. And they were watching, holding their breaths, because they knew that whatever came out of this trip would not be good for them. And so they were waiting to see. I mean, imagine the people of Taiwan and what they are thinking. All of our friends in Russia, in Europe, what they were thinking. And I think even more than anybody, the Russians were watching this very closely. Because when we were in New York, Russia and China were friends without limits. They were the bros. They kept very close connections with each other. now China has played a very interesting game, and Trump, where now we are talking to the Chinese about things that the Russians might feel uncomfortable about. So we're seeing the pieces of the chessboard moving around in ways that has all the pawns feeling uncomfortable. You know, what is Africa? We're telling Africa, you need to make some choices about what you want to see in your future. And they're being forced into making choices related to China because, again, I think they find China much more trustworthy as a partner than the United States. How this will boil down, or what it will boil down to in the UN remains to be seen. But I think China's prowess, its power, its leadership on the multilateral stage is increasing.
Senator, part of our objective today is to certainly talk about the path forward. And, you know, in terms of building strength here at home and building these relationships, it requires tough choices at home at times. There has been bipartisan support, for example, of something that the ambassador referenced, which is supporting Taiwan. We don't know where that stands exactly right now. What are the tough choices you think Congress and other leaders need to make over the next couple of years in order to position this relationship in a more constructive way?
Well, one thing that I think was absolutely spot on is talking about strength, talking about credibility that the ambassador and the secretary talked about. But I want to throw one more word into the mix here that I hear a lot from foreign leaders. I had this one leader of an Asian country call me and talk about just the challenges that they see when it comes to U.S., China, and just writ large with foreign policy. And they said to me, I want you to know that when we talk about America, we ask this question, is America a reliable country? And we know the answer to what that is. And so I want to just really throw out that sense of reliability and how important that is and how much we are struggling with it and why we will continue to struggle as a country even after Trump is gone. And this is something that we're going to have to rebuild. So when we're thinking through in Congress, how are we making these trade-offs? We also have to be thinking about the importance of credibility, of reliability in terms of what we're actually able to put forward. Even when we're talking about some of our strategic advantages, for instance, all of us agree that we need to be thinking closely about how our chip manufacturing and other types of AI tools are so critical to the economy of the future. But how are we able to tell other countries what we think they should be doing when it comes to chips or manufacturing equipment if we don't even know what the White House is going to do when it comes to chips to China and elsewhere? You know, when we're talking about, you know, all these different tools at our disposal, you know, the problem is really whether or not we will be consistent with that. And seeing over the course of my time in Congress how Republicans had one tune on China for the past few years and then all of a sudden are absolutely silent right now. I mean, not a single one talking to me about anything that they were concerned about over the past few years. It really just shows how much Trump has captured the Republican Party on China, and we're no longer able to talk about this with the strategy that is necessary for what is the most defining competition of our generation.
Another area where there seems to have been some capturing, shall we say, is on the war with Iran, where there still has not been a war powers vote that has passed.